Hi guys, long time no see. Basically the reason for that is that school has kept me really busy. I haven't read as much. And also I'm just like not home during daylight hours usually. Today I just did something a little different and I'm home now and I'm waiting for my lunch to cook, so I thought I would finally film a video. This video is going to be a little bit of a grab bag. So I'm going to do my October wrap up and then kind of a November TBR, which is more like things I'm reading right now. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about some channel things at the end. So that's how we're going to go. So how was my reading month? I'm looking at my computer because I don't actually remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I read, 8 books in October. I'm telling y'all, this is a fun state of existence. So in my October wrap-up, my October TBR, I was like, oh, I have all of these books from the library that I'm really excited to read, and I don't know if I'm going to get to them. And I did actually get to almost all of them, I'm pretty sure. So that was actually really impressive. My beginning half of the month definitely saved the second half of the month when I almost didn't read anything that wasn't for school. Oh, reaching the books. The first thing I finished in October was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is about a group of 7 students who attend a conservatory, not a college, a conservatory, and they're in the acting program, and in the acting program you only act Shakespeare. And then something dramatic happens during their senior year, and it results in a police investigation, and eventually one of the main characters is arrested and sent to prison. The story is about what happened during those several months, but it's framed by him getting out of prison and the detective, who's now retired, coming to him and being like, I know what came out of the trial wasn't the real thing. Please tell me what actually happened. And so this is like what actually happened. And it's really interesting. It's kind of, some people have called it pretentious. It kind of is. I really enjoyed all of the like Shakespeare, because they're so steeped in Shakespeare, they just kind of like quote him randomly as part of their conversation. And as a like Shakespeare scholar, I thought that was really great. I think some people that kind of annoyed them, so I really liked the story. I thought the ending was really nice. I gave it 5 stars. Did I give it 5 stars? I gave it 5 stars. The next thing I finished was Patrick Ness's And the Ocean Was Our Sky. This is a like upside down retelling of Moby Dick from the perspective of, well, it's not a retelling of Moby Dick, it's more like a reimagining of Moby Dick with different thematic goals. Anyway, it's about a pod of whales who go hunt humans, and how there's this human captain called Toby Wick that's like disrupting the order of things. And the main character, a whale named Bathsheba, gets to interact with a human and starts maybe reconsidering her preconceived ideas. It's really interesting. I kind of wish I had read Moby Dick more recently, because it's very clearly interacting with Moby Dick, and I don't remember enough of the story to pick up on all of the nuances, but it's very good. I enjoyed it a lot. It's also illustrated quite beautifully, and I felt like the pictures added a lot to the story. It's quite short, which is nice because Moby Dick is not. Yeah, I liked it. Then I read The Warden by Anthony Trollope. This is not my favorite classic in the world. It felt too ideologically pointed. Like, Trollope has a thing to say, and any author has a thing to say, but Trollope's whole story is constructed around the thing that he's trying to say. And I found myself liking the parts of the story that weren't, like, that were tangential to his main point a lot more. So I know this is like a really short book of his, and I know that he's written some longer ones, so maybe I would enjoy like a better balance of idea and like character building. We'll see. I haven't shut Trollope out of books that I would like to read in the future, but this one wasn't my favorite. I think I gave it 3 stars. It's about a warden. He is a church man who is the head of this kind of like charity for poor old men in the community, and a reformer in town, who happens to be the guy that's courting the warden's daughter, is kind of like sees that maybe the intent of the arrangement that happened 400 years before this happened isn't quite being carried out, and the warden might be making too much money off of the like provisions. Not that the men are like suffering, they're well cared for, which makes it like a thornier problem. But basically like an idea of church reform, social reform, political reform, lots of like reform going on there. It becomes this really interesting conflict in which nobody is really right, because you can't, like, they're arguing about this will that was written 400 years ago in like social conditions that were just like dramatically different from the way things are now. So it actually maybe has some timely implications, but I really liked the characters. I thought they were quite interesting, but like I said, I felt like a lot of it was just like too driven. I don't like books like that. The next thing I finished was Time's Convert by Deborah Harkness. This is like a sequel companion novel to the All Souls trilogy. I really like the All Souls trilogy. They're not the most perfect books in the world, but I like the story and I like the ideas and I like the characters. So this one follows kind of primarily one of the characters, Marcus, and it tells us about his past, which is really interesting. 18th century America, and like forward, he fought in the Revolutionary War, and it's interesting to see like some similar events that we learned about from Matthew's perspective, from Marcus's perspective, because they're a little bit different. I felt like that was really interesting. And then also it was kind of like a sequel to the rest of the story, but it was like really low stakes, which I actually kind of like. At first I was sort of disappointed by that, but then I kind of liked it. And by low stakes, I mean like there's nothing really dramatic happening. There's a little bit of conflict, but it's like interpersonal conflict, and it gets worked out in 10 pages. And it's more just like, what are the characters up to now? What kinds of things are they struggling with? Diana and Matthew are like coming to terms with the fact that they have magical toddlers. Like, what do you do with a toddler? What do you do with toddler twins? How do you parent magical toddler twins is like one of the big questions that's being asked. It's just like fun life experiences. So I liked that it struck this balance between like giving us new information about characters, giving us new information about the world, like having some conflict and kind of building the world out a little bit more, but then also it just lets us get the chance to like hang out with the characters again, and that's nice. I finished Vengeful by V. Schwab. Really enjoyed it. This is the sequel to Vicious. It continues the story of Eli and Victor 5 years after the first book ends. I liked the ending of this one. It was like complete, but also open enough for something else to happen. I think this is a good example of the kind of stories where each book really works as a standalone, but also works as a series. Schwab is good at doing that, I think, and she does it intentionally, especially with this series. So Vicious is about two college students who figure out how to give themselves superpowers and the like destructive implications of that. Vengeful kind of continues those same questions, but the characters are older now, they have more experience, they have more at stake, and we're also introduced to some new characters who are very gray and very interesting that also have superpowers. Anyway, it was a good story. I felt like there were lots of pieces and you weren't really sure like how they were going to fit together, but then as the story keeps going, you see the like sweep get narrower and narrower as characters start to connect and come together, and then there's like a moment. It was good. I liked it. I'm not having deep thoughts about these books because I can't really have deep thoughts about anything at the moment, but I think I gave most of those books 4 or 5 stars. The next thing I read was For School. This book is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. It won the Booker Prize when it was published in the 90s. Yeah. This is a really fascinating book. I don't actually, like, I find it really interesting. It's not my favorite book in the world. I don't know if I'll ever reread it. I had to write a paper about it, so I have lots of thoughts. Hence the tabs. But this is a story about a family in India who, at one point in the main character's childhood, something tragic happens and it completely reshapes the way the like family history works. And Roy is interested in looking at like all of the things that everybody participating in that event, like everything that led them to that moment, and then what happens after it. It's told in a non-linear way, which is also really interesting because you aren't ever quite sure what's happening. or even like what the problem is, but you start like collecting clues. It was cool to write a paper about it because I had to like go back and look at the story again, and it is a book I think that would be really valuable to reread, because once you know how it ends, you can go back and suddenly you see how like literally she tells you everything in the first chapter. You just don't know that she tells you about the things, because she often will, like, she just makes references to stuff and you're like, oh, I don't, that's just some like random reference, and then it turns out it has meaning. So it's a really interestingly constructed book, a really thoughtful book. She's thinking about like history and memory, and the interaction between the two, the way that national and social forces play into personal experiences and vice versa. If you like literary fiction, I would definitely recommend it. It's not for everybody, but if like I said, if you like literary fiction, give it a try. If you've never read literary fiction before, maybe don't read this one first, just because of its like non-linear aspect. But quite good. Okay, now we're getting out of order. I don't actually know what's going on. Okay, then like 2 weeks pass where I didn't really read anything except like stuff for school, and I had a paper due, and oh my goodness. But I did manage to read The Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. And thank goodness for The Four Quartets, because it pushed me over the edge of having my worst reading month. This was like equally the worst reading month. I only read 8 books, and I read 8 books in February. October is 4 days longer. I read a lot of stuff in October, just not whole books. But I read The Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. This is a collection of 4 poems that are connected to each other. They're probably his most famous later work, and partly I think just because of the moment that I read them, I was really deeply impacted by it. I've heard The Four Quartets quoted a lot by people that I admire, both writers and just like people that I know, and I had never quite gotten it before. I read the first one of the 4 before, but I hadn't read the others. And this time I was just like, oh, I get it. Eliot is hard to read as a poet because he's not telling a story. He's being really abstract and kind of like intellectual. So again, like if you aren't familiar with poetry, don't start with The Four Quartets. It's like not the place to start. But if you like T.S. Eliot, or if you like kind of more weird abstract things, The Four Quartets are wonderful. It's like I don't even think I can explain what. They're about time, again, like time and memory, and how a moment can impact the past and the future, and how we're always like calling back to that moment or looking forward to that moment. I'm not going to try to explain that any better than I just did. And then finally, I think technically I finished this in November, but whatever. I finished Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. It was wonderful. This is the sequel to Strange the Dreamer. Strange the Dreamer is really hard to explain, but it's literally like, this is the second half of Strange the Dreamer. So in Strange the Dreamer, we meet this character named Laszlo Strange. He is an orphan who has become the librarian of the biggest city and whatever, and he has been obsessed with this town called, or this city called Weep. And it's called Weep because when he was a kid, the name of it just like magically disappeared out of like all memory and existence. Nobody knows what it's called, and so they started calling it Weep because of the like sadness at the loss of the memory of the name. And then some people show up from Weep. Nobody's had contact with Weep for centuries, and suddenly people show up and say, hey, we have a problem and we need some help solving the problem, and we're here to collect like experts in all different kinds of fields who might be able to help us with this problem. And Laszlo, because of his obsession with Weep, knows more about the city than almost anybody, and he knows their language. And he kind of becomes friends with the guy who's heading the expedition, and so even though Laszlo doesn't really have like a clear function in the expedition, he ends up getting to come, and then he discovers that the problem is an interesting one. It's also the story about a group of half-human, half-god children who have also been abandoned and are working through a kind of like problems of hate that would be expressed towards them because of who their parents are. I really like the themes that Taylor deals with in this series. This idea of like after centuries of persecution, can healing actually happen? I think She's thinking about really relevant questions through a really interesting medium of fantasy. Her writing is beautiful. I feel like I said, Muse of Nightmares, it literally picks up where Strange the Dreamer left off, and I can't really talk about it. But she sets some problems up for herself in Strange the Dreamer that I think she solves very creatively and very well in Muse of Nightmares. She continues the themes while like complicating them and also thinking about them from different perspectives, and I think the ending was really well done. It's a little bittersweet, but not like it could have just ended in fire and tragedy, and she chooses not to go that way but to offer some hope like I was hoping, and so that was really great. I really enjoyed that duology. I think that's something that I will reread someday when I actually have time to read. Okay, so now I am just briefly going to talk about the things that I'm reading right now. I'm always in the middle of like 12,000 things. The semester's kind of winding down, so maybe I'll do like a semester reads wrap up or something in a couple of weeks and just talk about those books. I'm reading less and less whole books and more pieces of things now. So I'm partly through The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock, which I have quite enjoyed. It's historical fiction in the late 1700s. About a merchant who gets a mermaid and how that leads him to kind of step outside of his life in ways that he never thought he would. I'm reading The Grace of Enough by Haley Stewart, which is a nonfiction book about pursuing less and living more in a throwaway culture. I mean, that's actually what it's about. So I'm just interested in trying to simplify my life, make things less complicated. I have like a specific amount of money that I'm going to possess for the next 6 years, and I'd like to just like use it wisely and find space in my, you know, my means and like literal space in my apartment to maybe like reach out and help people more instead of just like buying stuff. Except books, I will always buy books. I'm reading All Hallows Eve by Charles Williams, or rereading it. I'm very nearly done with it. This is a really weird book. I'll talk about it in my wrap up. It's about some people and some ghosts and how they work together to defeat evil. Like I said, it's really weird because it's like more philosophical than anything. I'm rereading it and I kind of understand what's happening. I'm in the middle of The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. Again, a reread. Reread. This is set on the not real island of Thisbe. Every year, these carnivorous water horses come out of the ocean, and people catch them and ride them in a race next to the ocean where they're the most dangerous. And this is about two teenagers. One is a girl named Kate, who decides to ride her own actual real horse in the water horse races, and another about a young man named Sean, who has this like kind of magical understanding and ability to control water horses, who's also riding in the races. And they get closer and closer to each other as it becomes more and more clear that somebody's gonna lose a lot if the other person wins the race. So that is a really lovely story that I am enjoying reading. And then the final thing I'm working through is a series of poems. This is called Given by Wendell Berry. I've heard a lot about Wendell Berry recently, and I figured I should read him. I got through the first, 20 pages, and I keep stopping and flailing because his poetry is beautiful. If you are not familiar with poetry and you like nature, Wendell Berry would be a good place to start because his poems are very nature-based, they're very contemplative, they tell stories, or they're just like thoughts about a thing. I think they're really profound. His way with language is beautiful, and it's not showy, but then sometimes you come to a line and you're like, wow, the way you put that is really beautiful. So I like that. Some of them are really short, some of them are longer, like this one is, but I'm really enjoying that. I just find it like, it's like drinking a cup of tea or going on a nice walk. So that is everything that I have read or will be reading in the near future or recent past. I said I was going to say some things about the future of my channel, and so I'll be really brief. I think I'm gonna just make another video when I have time, but basically I'm not gonna leave, but I did kind of unintentionally take a hiatus just because I didn't have time to make or edit videos for a while, and during that time I started thinking about what I really want my channel to be, and I think the answer is not a typical booktube channel. I'm still kind of thinking about what it could be otherwise, and So I don't really have anything definite to say, except that I'm probably going to continue to post infrequently. I want to keep posting and not just like disappear. I'll like maintain a distant presence. And then I think at Christmas, when I am off from school and have just more like time to actually think about things, I'm gonna think through what I want this channel to look like. I think instead of just talking about like, here's the books I've read and here's books you should read and here's books that I bought, which is kind of the typical booktube thing, and I like watching videos like that, I really do. But I think that I have something to offer that is different from those kinds of things. I could keep doing that, it would be fine, but because I'm a PhD student and I occupy this like weird space in literary studies anyway, I think that I could offer something more contemplative and more thoughtful about not just what I'm reading, but why we read and how to read. I've heard from a number of people who have expressed in various degrees of plainness the fact that they are hesitant about encountering the classics because they don't have a strong background in the classics. Like, maybe you're somebody who the last time you read a classic was in high school and you didn't actually read it because it was boring, but now you'd like to try. Culture has made that seem intimidating, but it's actually not as hard as you think it is. But if I can be there to kind of take your hand and be your friend through that experience, that is something else that I would like to do. So I'm seeing it move more from here are books to read to become here are books to read and let's think about the role of art, including literature, in the world, and let's talk about how we interact with that kind of art from a very beginner's standpoint. So anyway, if you have any thoughts about any of those things, that's kind of where I am in my headspace. I mean, I did just do basically like a TBR wrap-up video, so like I said, I'm not planning to like fundamentally alter everything that I've been doing so far. I would like to just shape it in a different direction to maybe be a little bit more productive in a way. I know like plenty of people have blogs and podcasts about these kinds of things, but I don't really know that there's anything on YouTube, and it's a really interesting visual medium and it's one that I enjoy engaging with, so maybe I can put all of those things together, or maybe I won't. I don't know. We're gonna find out, I guess. If you have thoughts about that, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear if you're like, yes, that's great. If you have any ideas about what that might look like, I'd love to hear them. I'm really like in the very vague, amorphous stage of that. If you've read any of the books that I mentioned or would like to know more about any of the books that I've mentioned, let me know. I kind of like tried to keep my descriptions brief so that I could talk about more things, but I would love to talk about especially stuff like the Charles Williams. That is really weird. Like, maybe I'll just make a video about it if somebody asks. I don't know. Talk to me. Let's have a conversation. But otherwise, that is it for this video. Thanks for watching all the way through to the end, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.